First of all, domestically, there was news last week about the Federal Court of Appeals ruling that the Trudeau government's use of the Emergencies Act was unreasonable, unlawful, and a violation of charter rights. So I wanted to start there and have you help us understand in plain terms, what did the court say that the government did wrong?
Yeah, as you may remember, Zara, during the Freedom Convoy, we had a lot of people in Ottawa. I was there, part of them, and we did have a peaceful protest against the draconian measures that the Trudeau government was imposing at that time to Canadians with vaccine passport, stay-at-home orders, and all that. So that was, I think, a very successful protest. But Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act to control to people over there to be sure that that peaceful process will end. And I said at that time, that was unconstitutional, that was illegal. And the opposition in Ottawa, because we had at that time a liberal government, and we still have a liberal government in Ottawa right now in Canada. But at that time, the Conservative Party of Canada was okay with all that. And I said it's unconstitutional. We must stop that. But nothing happened. And, I'm very pleased that some people decided to sue the federal government about that for their rights. And you're right, last week, the Federal Court of Appeal. So that's not our Supreme Court. The government said that it will appeal that decision at the Supreme Court. And maybe we'll have a final decision in a year or something like that. But the court said that was illegal, that was unconstitutional, and Justin Trudeau and the federal government at that time didn't have the right reasons to invoke that Emergencies Act. So that's a big win. But at the same time, also, Canadians want people to be accountable for that. All these traditional politicians, Trudeau and all his ministers, nothing happened to them. And so I hope that if that cause is going to the Supreme Court, and I believe it will, I hope that the Supreme Court will confirm that decision. And after that, we must do our best in Canada to be sure that our establishment politicians will be accountable for what they did to us. And I may add to that also last week, the Health Canada, because at that time the federal government, was pushing the vaccine passport and that vaccine, so-called vaccine. And also, they decided to put in place a program for vaccine injured people in Canada, and they put some money in that. And after more than 3 years, the federal government came with what they did with that money. And actually, they spent about $15 million to give to injured Canadians. And we know now from the official data from the federal government that more than 10,000 Canadians were injured by these so-called vaccine. So, they were pushing that vaccine. That vaccine was not safe and efficient. And now we know from the data coming from the government that, they spent $18 million to give that to families. But, I hope that with that decision, if we have another pandemic or so-called pandemic, I hope that this decision will the federal government and other provincial governments, I hope that they will follow the Constitution and our Charter of Rights. But last week we had two big decisions, one from that judgment in court. We won. We weren't very happy with that. And the other one, knowing that more than 10,000 Canadians were injured by that so-called vaccine.
Right.